Welcome to the Joshua Ngoma podcast for spiritual inspiration and Africa's strategy positioning in global politics.
Africa's curse of natural resources. Apart from its people, Africa is endowed with greatness in the natural resources ranging from oil, diamonds, gold, iron, cobalt, uranium, copper, bauxite to silver. It also boasts of vast areas of arable land, woods, and tropical fruits. Large quantities of Africa's resources are undiscovered yet or barely tapped. Africa's wildlife accounts for numerous species in a natural habitat setting that provides an unbeatable game reserve experience. Countless rivers and lakes are a source of fresh water and small-scale fishing. Africa's largest reserves of minerals are a leading source of diamonds, copper, cobalt, uranium, and many other rare minerals. The largest deposits of diamonds are to be found embedded in the depths of the continent of Africa and are commonly dubbed as conflict or black diamonds. Africa's oil has taken greater importance with increased global demand and with more new oil reserves being found. The continent is fast becoming the new frontier of oil exploration. Nigeria and Sudan are two main producers, with China controlling 75% of Sudanese oil investments. The other major oil-producing countries are Libya, Algeria, Egypt, and Angola, while Mozambique and Tanzania have emerged as producers of natural gas. Ironically, the abundance of natural resources meant to sustain and produce immeasurable wealth for the African people has become our cursed blessing. Africa's centuries of tensions, wars, and underdevelopment can be directly linked to this scourge of natural resources. West Africa was a hub of trade and flourishing empires like Mali, Songhai, and Ghana, with reputable trading cities like Timbuktu. Africa's cash crops, gold, silver, ivory, and salt, became a fierce attraction for Europeans and Arab traders. Evidently, the Western Europeans were only interested in Africa and its flourishing supply of raw materials, and not in the African people themselves. Africans, a people of good spirit, rich historical and cultural heritage, became a cheap source of slave labor in Europe and the Americas. The transatlantic slave trade is the West's inconvenient truth and Africa's half-millennium of unfathomable pain and displacement. This was followed by a century of colonization and years of post-independence sluggish economic and political performance by most of its states. Claude Anderson, in Black Labor, White Wealth, observes the following with regard to the severity and brutality of the transatlantic slave trade. He observes, the sheer number of people enslaved was unprecedented. An estimated 15 million to 60 million blacks were captured in Africa for enslavement. More than 35 million died en route to various ports, with approximately 15 million actually reaching the slave markets. Black slavery was purely and simply racial and economic exploitation that caused economic revolutions and entrenched disparities between blacks and whites. Economically poor, non-industrialized nations of Europe like Spain, Portugal, Germany, and England commercialized human exploitation and suffering for the primary purpose of looting gold, silver, and precious commodities in Africa and the New World. Old forms of mercantilism were converted to new capitalism. Banking, currency, and marketing reforms were created. Africa became a warren for the commercial hunting of strong ebony bodies. Subsequently, skin color became a sign of degradation for its wearer and a sign of wealth for its owners. The actual number of Africans who died in transit during the transatlantic slave trade vary due to the incompleteness and scarcity of the records. The lower number or figure of 15 million represents an estimate of the number of slaves who physically made it alive to the North and South Americas and the Caribbean islands. The higher number of 60 million includes all the Africans who were killed resisting capture from within their homeland, those who died en route, and those who were shipped to Europe and the Middle Eastern countries. However, most historians agree that at least 2/3 of all the captured Africans died before making it to the slave markets without or throughout the whole world. Clearly, this was a Holocaust of unprecedented proportions. The sheer large numbers of slaves captured and the brutality with which it was executed is numbing. Others have argued that there was pre-existing Arab slave trade in Africa and that Africans enslaved other Africans way before the Arabs and the transatlantic slave trade by the Europeans. Evidently so, slavery was a common phenomenon in many other cultures of the world and not unique to Africa alone. But what makes the transatlantic slave trade unique and unprecedented was the sheer size of this commercial undertaking and its brutality and consequences, in which tens of millions of Africans are believed to have fatally perished. The notion that slavery was officially abolished in the 19th century, therefore, it cannot be used as an excuse for the present condition of poverty that persists among millions of Africans and their descendants all over the world is equally misplaced. Slavery is part of our history and an integral part of our ancient landmarks. It must therefore be accounted for and taught to our children, lest we forget as a people. History gives us the insights of why our present condition is the way it is and informs our perspectives on how we can better shape the future of our great continent. We are also reminded that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. It is estimated that in the southern United States alone, the African slaves were producing more than 126 million pounds of cotton, worth approximately 15 million United States dollars by the year 1817. It is also estimated that more than 90% of the African slaves were shipped to South America and the Caribbean islands, and the remaining 10% made it to the United States of America. It was black labor that boosted the economies of South and Central America and the Caribbean islands through exports to Europe like sugar, tobacco, molasses, vinegar, rum, and precious minerals. It is only as recent as July 29, 2008, that the United States House of Representatives officially apologized to African Americans for slavery. 140 years after the abolition of slavery, the House of Representatives in the United States of America gathered the courage and renounced slavery and called it fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of Jim Crow segregation. The several southern states, including Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, and Alabama, have also issued apologies for slavery. Almost a year later, the United States Senate also passed a unanimous resolution apologizing for slavery. The apologies for slavery have been as far-reaching as some of America's giant financial corporations. In 2005, JP Morgan Chase apologized for the role that one of its subsidiaries had played in using 10,000 slaves as collateral and accepting more than 1,000 slaves as payments when owners defaulted on loans. In the same year, Wachovia Corp revealed that one of the banks it acquired had put thousands of slaves to work on the railroad. These apologies have been nothing more than a public acknowledgement and confession of guilt, but have fallen short of restitution for centuries of free black labor. Randall Robinson, author of The Debt What America Owes to Blacks, says that much is owed and it is quantifiable. It is owed as one would owe for any labor that one has not paid for. And until steps are taken in that direction, we have not accomplished anything. Professor Charles J. Ogletree, a prominent Harvard Law School director of the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice and a prominent proponent of restitution, said, "While I support the Senate's resolution, it is not a substitute for reparations. That battle will be prolonged." Britain concealed its role and involvement in slavery. British slavery was concealed because it was mainly practiced on plantations in the Caribbean islands, 3,000 miles from Britain's home mainland. The geographical distance has made it easier to page out slavery in British history after the 1833 Slavery Abolition Act. This act formally freed 800,000 Africans who were legally property of Britain's slave owners. Less known is the fact that the same Abolition Act gave financial compensation of £20 million to 46,000 British slave owners for loss of their property. In 1834, this represented 40% of the total British government expenditure, a modern equivalent of 16 to 17 billion pounds. The slaves themselves did not get any compensation. Under the same act, a clause compelled them to provide 45 hours of unpaid labor each week to their former masters for a further 4 years after the Abolition Act. Africa has some forgotten wars that are still going on. Some of Africa's protracted civil conflicts and war have endured in the areas where there are conflict diamonds. According to the United Nations, conflict or blood diamonds originate from areas controlled by forces or factions opposed to legitimate and internationally recognized governments. The illicit diamonds are used to fund military action in opposition to those governments or in contravention of the decisions of the Security Council. Rebel forces have often used rough diamond caches to finance arms purchases and other illegal activities. Neighboring and other countries can be used as trading and transit grounds for illicit diamonds. Once diamonds are brought to market, their origin is difficult to trace, and once polished, they can no longer be identifiable. For example, the late Jonas Savimbi's UNITA of Angola controlled large portions of diamond areas and used the proceeds from the sale of rough diamonds to buy weaponry and fund its rebellion to the Angolan government until a truce was reached. In Sierra Leone, the Revolutionary United Front, RUF, rebel group, used blood diamonds to fund its conflict with the Sierra Leone government. It was also established that the illicit trade in diamonds from Sierra Leone could not be conducted without the permission and involvement of the Liberian government officials. Charles Taylor's government of Liberia was actively supporting the RAF at the highest levels according to the Security Council adopted Resolution 1343 of March 7, 2001. Charles Taylor has appeared for war crimes before a special United Nations court in the Dutch town in the Netherlands. So where does Apple and others get minerals for their electronic components? Nearly all high-tech consumer gadgets like cell phones, DVD players, video game systems, and computers use tantalum. Tantalum is a pearly blue-gray mineral mainly found in Brazil, Australia, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. In 2022, the DRC's tantalum production amounted to an estimated 860 metric tons, making the DRC the largest tantalum producer by far. Tantalite, the ore that bears tantalum, is not traded on commodities exchanges, but it is instead bought and sold through shadowy dealers, making its origins difficult to trace. Tantalite is refined into coltan and at smelters mainly in China, Kazakhstan, and the United States. The mineral is then sold to tech manufacturers that make high-tech devices. The United States maintains a supply of tantalum at its national defense stockpile and is 100% import reliant from Rwanda, Brazil, Canada, and Australia. In 2014, Apple declared that it had audited smelters in its supply chain, and none of them used tantalum from the war-torn region in the DRC. This was an important step in transparency and human rights advocacy. Currently, the West war, based on conflict minerals, is being waged in the Eastern Congo, and it has largely been forgotten from the international spotlight. The facts from this conflict are diabolical and the statistics staggeringly painful. The Democratic Republic of Congo faces a complex and prolonged crisis impacting 15 million children who are exposed to armed conflict, disease outbreaks, and chronic hunger. Since its independence in 1960, the country has been under siege from several hostilities, resulting in a never-ending civil conflict. A surge in violence in March of 2022 occurred between government-led forces and non-state actors in the eastern provinces of Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu, causing a widespread humanitarian crisis of hunger as a result of food shortages and mass displacement of people across the region. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, 6.2 million people have been displaced, 5.5 million within the DRC and 1.1 million across borders seeking asylum. Since 1996, the DRC has been fighting in a silent war that has so far claimed 6 million people. This conflict is the world's bloodiest since World War II. At the center of this war is the opaque and corrupt mining deals for precious and rare minerals minerals found in the DRC. The First and Second Congo Wars, often dubbed the African World War, involved multiple foreign armies, militia groups, and investors. Foreign armies come from countries such as Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Angola, Namibia, Libya, Uganda, and Sudan. Globally, economic external interests have beleaguered a politically weak DRC. For example, Israel's involvement in the diamond trade in Congo is a remarkable achievement for that country. Since 1997, Israeli companies have carved out a dominant position, making a significant contribution to Israel's economy. In 2016, cut diamonds accounted for 23% of Israel's total exports and constituting 12% of the world's diamond trade. At about 20,000 United Nations troops, Congo is home to the largest peacekeeping mission in the world. In spite of this ongoing conflict, essential minerals are leaving the Congo to feed the global economy. Apple, for example, could not make the same claims for gold, tin, and tungsten as it did for coltan, which are also essential elements in the manufacture of modern electronic components, but mined in war zones. Smuggling of ore across porous borders in this region afflicted by conflict is easy. There is non-existent or scarce paper trail for the ore mined by villagers in small makeshift mines, and warlords control exports. The Apple disclosure went beyond the new 2012 regulation passed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, under the Dodd-Frank Financial Regulation Act of 2010. The rule requires that U.S. publicly traded companies to audit their supply chains and insist that they disclose any use of conflict minerals, but not the names of the smelters. In 2009, the Conflict-Free Sourcing Initiative, CFSI, was formed, backed by Apple, Intel, Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, and General Electric. CFSI is a self-policing and a voluntary group meant to vet smelters for the sources of potential conflict minerals. The eastern part of the Republic of Congo exports coltan, and Rwanda is the most important exporter of the metal tantalum on the continent of Africa. In 2013, Rwanda became the largest exporter of tantalum and ships out to foreign smelters, mainly in China. Rwanda supplied about 2,400 tons, representing about 28% of the global output of 8,800 tons. This increase represented more than a double output compared to the 2012 yields. But according to the United States Geological Survey data, Rwanda has consistently produced about 1,500 tons of tantalum annually. This increase fueled speculation that minerals such as tin and tantalum are smuggled out of the war-torn areas in the Congo into Rwanda and Burundi for export. It is suspected that tin and tantalum smuggled into Rwanda is, for instance, laundered through and incorporated in the domestic tagging system and exported as legitimate Rwandan material. Proceeds from the sale of coltan to Europe and American markets are suspected to finance the present-day conflict in the Republic of Congo. However, gold still remains the largest source of conflict in the Eastern Congo. With a continued rise in the price of gold on the market, gold from Congo remains a conflict mineral in very high demand. The United Nations report further states that the path that cotton takes to get from Central Africa to the world market is a highly convoluted one, with legitimate mining operations often being confused with illegal rebel operations and vice versa, making it difficult to trace the origin. To be safe, in recent months, many electronics companies have publicly rejected the use of cotton from anywhere in Central Africa, instead relying on their main suppliers in Australia. American-based Chemet, the world's largest maker of tantalum capacitors, has asked its suppliers to certify that their cotton ore does not come from Congo or bordering countries. But it may be a little case of too little, too late. Much of the cotton illegally stolen from Congo is already in laptops, cell phones, and electronics all over the world. The current Congo war has been fought since 1994 when Hutu rebels crossed the border from neighboring Rwanda, many of whom are believed to have committed atrocities in the Rwandan genocide. To restore peace in the region, various alliances and commitments were made but never kept. Several regional countries, including Rwanda, Uganda, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Angola, have been involved in the Eastern Congo War. Local warlords make up the many militia groups. Conditions of poverty, lawlessness, a lack of a good infrastructure are the ideal breeding ground for warlords to exploit the local population and the vast mineral resources. Two main protagonists, the Congo Army, FRDC, and the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR, rebels, riddle the conflict. The Lord's Resistance Army is led by Joseph Kony, Kony's religious sect and military group based in northern Uganda. They have also sought refuge in eastern Congo from Uganda's military and have also fought against the Congolese government troops. The Congolese National Army is ill-equipped and is characterized by very few and very low morals and morale. Very low wages and poor conditions of service make it an ill-disciplined force with not much of a difference to the rebel groups and are almost as hostile to the local civilian population as the rebels. War and violence are so endemic and characteristic to an entire generation of young people that it is the only thing that they have grown to know. Very few have been to school, and there are no economic structures to work in, even if they got qualified for the jobs. Yet what is lamentable is that while the Democratic Republic of Congo exports a key raw ingredient in consumer electronics, it buys back finished products in the form of computers, cell phones, DVD players, and video game systems. How about we try the reverse for a change by importing the technology, setting up the manufacturing base, and sell the finished products to the rest of the world? This is precisely how China and South Korea have risen to economic prominence and the giants that they have become. They have made huge investments in the production of finished goods and services for their ever-growing domestic market and for export to the rest of the world. Nigeria ranks as Africa's largest producer of oil and the 15th largest oil-producing country in the world, with the maximum crude oil production capacity of about 2 million barrels per day. In 2006, the world was reminded of the huge disparity between the multi-billion-dollar oil industry and the abject poverty of the people on whose land it is drilled, the Delta Triangle of Nigeria. Nigeria's Delta region is home to vast oil reserves, making the country one of the world's biggest oil exporters. The irony is that this region of Nigeria, the Delta Triangle, remains poor, undeveloped, and driven by armed gangs of youths who hide out in the swamps and creeks that make up the Delta for many years now. They have attacked oil pipelines and kidnapped foreign workers for ransom as a protest to the Nigerian authorities. A report commissioned by Shell said that the level of conflict in the region was compared to Colombia and Chechnya. For instance, attacks on Shell installations forced a 10% drop in Nigeria's oil production. The armed group's argument is that very little from the lucrative oil proceeds, if anything, goes back to support the impoverished local communities, and that the oil belongs to the people in the Delta Triangle in the first place. In Ken Saro-Wiwa, The War Against the Ogoni, 1992, he asserts that petroleum was discovered in Ogoni in 1958, and since then, an estimated 100 billion United States dollars worth of oil and gas has been carted away from Ogoniland. In return for this, the Ogoni people have received nothing. From 1965 to 1970, Nigeria's oil revenue amounted to less than 2 billion United States dollars, and 19 million Nigerians live below the national poverty line. By contrast, Nigeria's oil revenue since 1995 amounted to 400 billion United States dollars, and the number of Nigerians living under the national poverty line increased to 90 million, notwithstanding the increases in population. It is implausible how that the increase in Nigeria's oil revenues is inversely related to the number of people who live above the poverty datum line. The more the oil revenues realized over the years, the more the number of Nigerians that have become poorer, making Nigeria's case a paradox of plenty. Right-hand activist Ken Saro-Wiwa mounted an internationally recognized protest movement meant to protect the native lands of the Ogoni people from economic and environmental exploitation by the military government of Nigeria and the multinational oil companies. Saro-Wiwa's execution in 1995 led to the imposition of sanctions against the Sani Abacha-led military government by the United States, England, and the European Union. After the death of Sani Abacha in 1998, the sanctions were lifted, and the incoming president, Olusegun Obasanjo, increased the revenue reallocation program for communities in the oil-producing Niger Delta by 10% from the previous 3%. Now we know that most major and bloody conflicts in Africa are tied to the control of land and natural and raw materials and resources, from Darfur in Sudan to the Democratic Republic of Congo and to the land redistribution in Zimbabwe. Now we know the true economic value of our land natural and human resources. They are a key component to the sustenance of the global economy. What Africa can no longer afford is to give away its prized resources for next to nothing. The continent is endowed with practically everything to become self-sufficient, and no single African should be condemned to perpetual instability, starvation, and poverty. More than 1 billion strong Africans are capable of rising together and demand an equitable share of the wealth that rightly belongs to them, and reverse the trend where the benefits only go in one direction, away from Africa. Thank you for listening and watching. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Joshua Ongoma podcast. Bye for now until next time.